If you'll go ahead and turn your Bibles now to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, we'll go ahead and get started here. We are starting the preparation for the sixth and final Bible Bowl of the season here, chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16. So, with the Bible Bowl being today, of course, that means preparing for the next one, we've got new memory work. So, we'll start with 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 1. It says, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of the angels and have not charity, I am become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal." And we'll kind of get into more of that today. 1 Corinthians 14, verse 32, "And the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets." 1 Corinthians 15, 58, "Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as ye know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord." 1 Corinthians 16, 22, "If any man love not the Lord Jesus Christ, let him be anathema maranatha." And the other two verses that are not part of 1 Corinthians, we've got Revelation 2:10. This is talking about being faithful, remaining faithful. "Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life." And also Matthew 25, 21. "His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord." All right, so as following the format that Bill has set forth, with 1 Corinthians, we started off talking about problems that they had in the church, and those were addressed in the problems of division, defilement, unrighteousness, and fornication. That took us through the first 6 chapters there. And then we get into the questions. And of course, tonight we're continuing on, as he began last week, about concerning spiritual gifts. And this really covers chapters 12, 13, and 14 here. And we'll see how spiritual gifts fall into this chapter here. Chapter 12 last week that Bill had covered was talking about many gifts in one church. Tonight we'll be covering love each other with chapter 13. And then next week, concerning spiritual gifts, we'll talk about how to do all things decently and in order. But tonight, we're talking about love. We're talking about love each other. And we're going to kind of break this up into 3 different sections here tonight. We're going to talk about the essentiality of love. Why is love so important? We're going to talk about characteristics of love. What is love and what it and what is it not? And then we're going to talk about how some of the spiritual gifts, or many of the spiritual gifts rather, were to end at some point. But some gifts, not necessarily spiritual gifts, but some gifts will continue. And so we'll get into that here this evening. Now, before we begin, it's interesting to note that the King James Version refers to this word many times called charity, whereas we have many other versions, the New King James, the American Standard Version, the English Standard Version, many others use the word love rather than charity. And so at least right off we can see, okay, charity, we have an idea of what charity means, but when we talk about love, it seems to have a little bit of a different meaning. So we know that what we're really talking about here is love, and how love is so important here. As we concluded chapter 12, we concluded with the verse 31. Paul was saying, "But covet earnestly the best gifts, and yet I show unto you a more excellent way." So as we're getting into chapter 13, Paul is telling them he wants them to strive. He wants them to desire those gifts, but he has a more excellent way. And we're going to get into that here. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 1. "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal." So Paul had these spiritual gifts. He had as many gifts of those as he wanted, really. He could do so many different miraculous things. But if he didn't do them with love, then he really didn't have anything. The whole purpose of those gifts was to show the wonder of Jesus Christ. And if he's trying to show those miracles, perform those miracles, without the right motive, then it really didn't mean anything to those that he helped out. Now, the Corinthians, of course, there was a very worldly city. The Corinthians, they were part of this congregation. They were very religious, but they just weren't doing things in the right way. We've talked in recent weeks about things like the Lord's Supper and the veiling of women, just things that they were trying to do, but they didn't have their act quite together. And so this is kind of another one of those things. They wanted these best spiritual gifts. They wanted to outdo each other. So they weren't using these gifts for necessarily the right reasons. Now, the pagans that were there in the city, of course, this was a very morally corrupt city at the time. There were many pagans. They had a lot of influence there. In their worship services, they used a lot of other instruments and cymbals. You think of those cymbals in a marching band where they're banging those things together. I would dread the day as a parent if my kids came home and said, I want to be in the marching band and I want to play the cymbals. Trying to get them to practice on that would be a challenge, I believe. But it's not something that you really want to listen to by itself. You don't want to hear somebody out there practicing banging some cymbals. That doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, just because it's not very pleasing to the ear. It's something that would be empty, vain. It's just not something that you would desire. And so we know that to tell people about God is just not enough. We've got to show them. We've got to show them what it means to be a child of God. Verse 2, and though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. Now, Paul had all these gifts. He had all the knowledge of Jesus Christ. He knew everything that had previously been hidden from all of mankind. He knew that through as being an apostle. He had that knowledge of what God wanted him to know. But he knew that love was more important than any of these spiritual gifts. And if any of these gifts were going to be used without love, there's going to be no profit to the soul. Imagine if he had the gift of healing. He would go to heal somebody. If he's not using that gift to show the miraculous wonder of Jesus Christ, if he's just going to heal, I want you to heal this broken bone, heal this whatever sickness or whatever else that you've got, if he doesn't love that person enough to want to show him the beauty and the excitement of being a child of God, then it's all for nothing. There's no use, no profit to the soul. Verse 3, and though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. So we're talking about some of the more physical things here. He's talking about if he gives everything that he's got and he sacrifices his body, if it's not for love, what does it mean? Love is just as necessary if any profit is to be gained. I think about a lot of denominations in the world today. You've got denominations that feed the poor. They clothe the homeless. They give shelter. There's so many good things that they do, but yet it's not going to be profitable to those that they help if they're not doing it in love, in showing them the real way to be with Jesus. They're showing them they're meeting these physical needs that they've got, but then they're pulling them away from Christ rather than pulling them towards Christ. And so it's possible for us to give everything away without giving any profit to our souls or to their souls if our motive is wrong. We think about Ananias and Sapphira in Acts chapter 5. Beginning in verse 1, it says, but a certain man named Ananias with Sapphira his wife sold a possession and kept back part of the price, his wife also being privy to it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why hath Satan filled thine heart to lie to the Holy Ghost and to keep back part of the price of this land? Whiles it remained, was it not thine own? And after it was sold, was it not in thine own power? Why hast thou conceived this thing in thine heart? Thou hast not lied unto men, but unto God. And Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and gave up the ghost. And great fear came on all them that heard these things. And the young men arose, wound him up, and carried him out, and buried him. And it was about the space of 3 hours after, when his wife, not knowing what was done, came in. And Peter answered unto her, Tell me whether ye sold the land for so much? And she said, Yea, for so much. Then Peter said unto her, How is it that ye have agreed together to tempt the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of them which have buried thy husband are at the door, and shall carry thee out. Then fell she down straightway at his feet, and yielded up the ghost. And the young men came in, and found her dead, and carrying her forth, buried her by her husband. And great fear came upon all the church, and upon as many as heard these things. And by the hands of the apostles were many signs and wonders wrought among the people. And they were all with one accord in Solomon's porch. And the rest durst no man to join himself to them, but the people magnified them. And believers were the more added to the Lord, multitudes both of men and women. Now Ananias and Sapphira, they had every right to keep whatever it was that they wanted. But it was their pride that really got in the way. They were trying to be arrogant about it. They were trying to be boastful about presenting their donation, their gift, as more than it really was. They gave so much, but they gave it for the wrong reasons, and that's why their souls were required of them. Then we get into the characteristics of love, and that begins in verse 4. It says, charity, again, charity being love, charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. Now when you say charity suffereth long, we've got to endure trials and persecutions in this life. Because we love our brethren and our fellow man, we must suffer along with them. How many of us have members of our own immediate or extended families that are not Christians, and our hearts just ache for the day when they decide to come and to be baptized? Our hearts just ache for that. We long for that, and we're suffering through that. We're long suffering. We're right there alongside them, waiting anxiously for that day. We suffer long because we love them, and God suffers us. When we don't do exactly what He wants us to do, it hurts God too. So He suffers right along with us. Charity, love is kind. We need to make sure that we're acting benevolently, acting right, doing what's right, doing the right thing. Just as Christ healed, He fed, He taught, and He did so many good works for people. Now, kindness can be expressed by our words and actions, but if it's not in our heart first, then people are going to know that. People know if you're doing a good work just to be kind to them, or they know if you're doing a good work just to be seen of men or to gain some other reward. People know if you're sincere or not. We see how what we say and how our hearts are very much intertwined. In Matthew chapter 12, beginning in verse 34, it says, Jesus says, O generation of vipers, how can ye, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. A good man out of the treasure of the heart bringeth forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure bringeth forth evil things. If we're going to say kind things, we need to mean it. It's very vain. It's not going to profit anybody if we're just doing things, just kind of going through the motions. For somebody to really understand that we care for them, we must treat them right, and that goes back to making sure that our heart is right. And of course, we all know the golden rule, Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would do that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. We need to make sure that we're treating people like we want to be treated. That is just a very basic rule that Jesus taught us. We want people to be nice to us. We want people to be kind to us. We want people to love us. We need to reflect that love and kindness and generosity back on them. It says, charity envieth not. Now, we can't look with ill will at the good fortunes of others. Envy is just useless. It's not profitable. Envy, we see many times throughout the Bible about how envy got the better of people. It caused Cain to murder Abel in Genesis chapter 4. It caused Haman's downfall. We've studied that recently in the book of Esther. Envy delivered Christ. The Jews decided they needed him crucified. And we see how love and envy are just complete opposites. Love is generous. Envy is covetousness. Love wants the best for people. Envy says, I want the best for me. And so love and envy just don't go together. We as Christians are the most blessed people in the entire world. We have the hope of everlasting life with God in heaven. What can possibly be better than that? We as Christians should not envy anybody else, because we have the greatest gift that can ever be given. We want to share that with others. We don't want to envy others because there's nothing else to envy. We've got the greatest blessing that we can have. Love, charity, vaunteth not itself. Love is not puffed up. It's not vaunted. We don't need to boast or brag about ourselves. We hear about people that like to top your story with a better story. Somebody that's had it bigger, better, worse, harder, whatever the case may be. Whatever your story is, they've got a more extreme story. That's not what it's all about. All that does is creates feelings of importance and superiority. Oh, I'm a better person than you. That's not what love is. There's a difference in overconfidence versus self-confidence. If you're overconfident, you're going to brag about yourself. You're going to be arrogant about these things. And that's the complete opposite of having a solid degree of self-confidence. And love demands humility. Instead of being so arrogant about things, we need to make sure that we're humble about these things. Moving on to verse 5, it says, Love, charity, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil. All right, so love does not behave unseemly. That unseemly is improper behavior, bad manners. Love doesn't act like that. We need to be courteous. We need to show consideration of others. Respect their feelings, respect who they are. Love does not seeketh its own. We don't want to be selfish about these things. That greatest blessing that we just talked about, we need to share that with others. We don't need to keep that to ourselves. We don't need to put our happiness before other people, to neglecting the others. We're not out here just looking out for number one. We're not looking out for ourselves. We need to look out for everyone else too. Just like God, we need to use God as the standard. We see how Jesus said in Matthew chapter 16, beginning in verse 24. Then said Jesus unto his disciples, If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever shall save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? We don't need to be out there trying to see what all we can get. It's not who dies with the most toys wins. That's not what life is all about. We don't want to try to get everything for ourselves. What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Hopefully we won't want to exchange anything for our soul. Love is not easily provoked. Sometimes you ever see people, they have a real short fuse. They lose their temper pretty easily. That's not the way that we as Christians need to behave. Now, it's okay to be frustrated or angry. If you're out in traffic, somebody cuts you off, it's okay to be angry about that. What's not okay is to show them obscene gestures and tailgate them and do all this other kind of stuff. That's not the way Christians are supposed to be act. It's okay to be frustrated and angry, but just don't lose your cool. Don't lose your temper. That's where sin comes in. It's not sinful to be frustrated or angry, but it is sinful to lose control like that. And it's easy. It's very easy to say and do hurtful things and say sinful things unintentionally, just in the heat of the moment there. When you lose your cool, bad things can happen. In Proverbs 14, verse 17, he that is soon angry dealeth foolishly, and a man of wicked devices is hated. Proverbs 16:32, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city. James 1:19 and 20, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. And thinking about these losing your temper, saying things that you shouldn't say, I think about that song, Angry Words. Those linger. People will remember if you're very unkind to them. That's not the way that we as Christians need to act or need to love those others. Love thinketh no evil. Now, it's impossible never to think anything evil, but as soon as it comes into our hearts, we need to make sure that we get rid of that. It's not something we want to dwell on. 1 Corinthians 14:20, brethren, be not children in understanding, howbeit in malice be ye like children, but in understanding be men. We need to be more like kids when it comes to thinking about evil things. Little children are so pure, so wholesome, they don't have an evil bone in their body normally. That's the way that we want to be. We don't want to be evil or think evil thoughts or do evil things to others. That's not the way that we need to be. 1 Corinthians 13, and then moving on to verse 6. Rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in truth. We can't relish other people going through bad times. You think of karma. You think what we call karma. If somebody is doing something bad and then something bad happens to them, we kind of have to laugh and say, oh, they deserve it. That's really not the way we need to be as Christians. If we have real love for people, are we going to take pleasure in bad things happening to them? Now, if we have real love, we don't want to see people suffering. I've been to several third world countries now. You see people down there that are in those countries that are physically suffering. They don't have a place to stay. They don't have a place to sleep. They don't have food to eat. You see them suffering. There's no pleasure to be taken in that. But what's more important than the physical suffering, seeing people physically suffering, is to see them spiritually suffering. So we need to make sure that we're taking Christ to those that are suffering. And because if we have real love, we don't want people to be without Christ. Now, love also requires that we must stand against all sin and religious error, and we have to stand for the truth. Now, a lot of people in the culture today say, can't we all just get along? Or the world says a lot of things, and we as Christians don't necessarily agree with that. There are plenty of topics out there. You can pick, many of them, these cultural issues. Marriage and divorce, alcohol, drug use, homosexuality, transgenderism, abortion, whatever the topic is, a lot of people in the culture say, oh, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. But we as Christians must rejoice in the truth, not in iniquity. If we have real love for people, we need to make sure that we are standing. We do want to get along with people, but not at the cost of condoning sinful activity. Then verse 7, love beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. So now we're kind of transitioning from what love is not to what love is. We see how love beareth all things. Love must be strong and steadfast. Just like Christ's love. You imagine Christ on the cross. He could have gotten himself off. What is it that kept him on that cross? It was his love for us. That's what kept him on the cross. Christ had that solid, that strong, that steadfast love for us. It kept him there. And that's the kind of love that we want to have. Think about when he said in Luke 23:34, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The very people that put him on that cross, he was begging his Father, forgive them. They put him on that cross. They started casting lots and parting his raiment. They were taking of the spoils there. But Jesus wanted them to be forgiven. Now that is strong, steadfast love. Paul suffered wrongly, but he wanted the best for others. You think about when he was talking with King Agrippa in Acts chapter 26, beginning in verse 27. He says, King Agrippa, believest thou the prophets? I know that thou believest. Then Agrippa said unto Paul, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. And Paul said, I would to God that not only thou, but also all that hear me this day were both almost and altogether such as I am, except these bonds. Paul wanted Agrippa. He knew that Agrippa knew the truth, but Agrippa just couldn't let go of his lifestyle and his status there to become a Christian. Love believeth all things. Now, we've got to have an open mind, giving people the benefit of the doubt. When people tell us something, we want to believe it's the truth. So many people have closed minds when it comes to many topics, any that we just discussed, the marriage and divorce, alcohol, drug use, transgender, homosexual issues, whatever the case may be. They think, well, God made me this way, or they just don't have, they have closed minds. They don't want to see the truth. Now, there's a time and a place for everything, though. Facebook is not probably the best place to get into a real argument about Christianity, because people tend to just pile on and they don't want to hear it, and that's just not a very good avenue for trying to tell the truth. Pick your times and your places when you can share that. In person is so much better. We need to make sure that we're trying to help change people's minds. Love hopeth all things. As Christians, we're the only ones with real hope. If we don't honestly believe that things are going to be better in heaven than they are today, then how can we face life? We know that we have a greater tomorrow. Life is going to be better, so much better in the future than it has ever been or that it ever will be on this earth. We have that hope. We hope in all things. Romans 8:24 and 25, for we are saved by hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, why doth yet he hope for? For if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it? Once we've realized something, we're not going to hope for it anymore. But once we get to heaven, that's we're hoping and waiting for that day. Love endureth all things. Endure, that's more of a military term to talking about sustaining an assault. We're assaulted every day by our worldly culture. It's something that all these messages are constantly coming into our lives, and we just need to endure them. We need to make sure that we're not being sucked away by some of those things of the earth, of the world. All right, then we're going to talk about how spiritual gifts are going to end. But faith, hope, and love are going to continue. In this next section here, we see verse 8. Charity never faileth, but whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. Now, the spiritual gifts we know that went away with the apostles. The apostles laid their hands on people, and they were able to convey these spiritual gifts. Once the apostles were gone, that's no longer possible. We don't have any need for the prophecies today. We have the entire New Testament here with us. There's no reason we need any prophecies. We don't have a need for tongues, for speaking in tongues. We can very easily go out and learn a new language. There are plenty of computer programs. There are tutors that we can have, classes that we can take. We can easily learn a language if we apply ourselves. We don't need a spiritual gift to be able to do that. We have no need for a spiritual gift of knowledge. We have everything that we need. All it's going to take is a little bit of effort on our part to read and to study and to be able to absorb that, to know that, to learn that. We don't need a spiritual gift of knowledge when we can easily access that knowledge on our own. And we know that no new truth is going to be revealed. We have everything that we need. In Galatians 1, verses 6 through 9, it says, Paul says, I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. But though we, or an angel from heaven, preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. As we said before, so say I now again, if any man preach any other gospel unto you than ye have received, let him be accursed. We've got it right here. We don't need anything else. No new revelations, no new prophecies. This is it. This is what we need. And we're always going to have a need for love. Verse 9, for we know in part and we prophesy in part. Now we have the New Testament, and it was revealed part by part, a little bit here, a little bit there. Some was partly revealed by spiritual gifts. They didn't have this luxury. Having the New Testament, the complete New Testament here, is a luxury for us. They didn't have that back in the first century. We have unlimited access to the will of God through this right here. They didn't have that luxury back then. Verse 10, but when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. Now it's interesting to think about when what is perfect is come. Are we talking about Christ? Well, Christ had already been there and ascended into heaven before this was written, so that's not what we're talking about here. Was he talking about love being perfect? Well, love has always existed in things, so that's not what he's talking about. When we're talking about that which is perfect is come, that we're talking about completeness. It means the completion of the New Testament, or the full revelation of God's will, which is what we have right here. When that which is perfect, the New Testament, is come, then that which is in part, those spiritual gifts, are going to be done away with. Verse 11, when I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. When I became a man, I put away childish things. Now, as we're young toddlers, we have certain toys. As we grow up and we mature, we age, we have different kinds of toys, don't we? We have different things that we need. We're not going to be adults playing with baby toys. That's not what we do. When we mature, we don't have the need for childish things like that. Now, once we have the full, mature, complete gospel, we don't have the need for these other little things like these spiritual gifts. So all that's done away with. We can be mature Christians without these spiritual gifts because we have the Old Testament, or the New Testament. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. Now back in these days, they didn't have a mirror to be able to look into. They usually it was a piece of metal, highly polished, that they could look into, and it was a rudimentary kind of mirror. You could basically see what it is, but it wasn't very clear. But now, through the eyes of the New Testament, we can certainly see what the future holds. We don't need to worry about other things. We don't have to worry about spiritual gifts. We don't need to worry about prophesying or anything like that, because we can see with full clarity what it is that God wants from us. And then we get to verse 13. And now abideth faith, hope, charity, these three. But the greatest of these is charity. Now faith, hope, and love are going to exist until the end of time here. Faith, yes, we need faith here to be pleasing to God. But once we see heaven, we don't need faith anymore. Once we have seen heaven, that faith, there's no need for faith. We see that in Hebrews 11:1, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Once we see heaven, we don't need that faith. And once we are fulfilled in heaven, we don't have to hope for that anymore, because we'll have it. We'll be there. We'll be in heaven. We'll have that great reward. We don't need to hope for it anymore. But love will certainly continue once we're in heaven. We have that love, that brotherly love here on earth, and we will continue to have that in heaven. That's why love, charity, is the greatest of these, because that will endure forever. Now those that were in Corinth, they certainly desired these spiritual gifts, but they just didn't quite have a grasp on what the best spiritual gift, or why a gift was better than any other gift. They thought it was to be seen of men. They didn't understand that those gifts had a purpose, to show people the wonder and the miracles of Christ. They didn't understand that. Today, we can still desire these gifts from God. We don't have the spiritual gifts, but we certainly have faith, and we certainly have hope, and we certainly hopefully have love too. But sometimes our faith may waver. Sometimes we might get into a hopeless situation, something that we just don't see a hope for a better future. That's very easy. We as human beings can certainly fall into that trap sometimes. And so sometimes if we lose all that, if we lose sight of the faith, we lose sight of the hope, if we lose sight of what really matters in this life, then it can be a pretty daunting future for us. But if anybody here tonight has lost that, if they've lost that passion, they've lost that faith, they've lost that hope, they've lost that love, then tonight would be a perfect time to come back to God. Whether it's through the waters of baptism or whether it's through the prayers of the congregation, if you've lost that, please come back. Please come back tonight. If there's anything that we can do for you, please come forward now as we stand and sing.